It hasn't taken long for President Joe Biden to make a clean break with Donald Trump's agenda in the Middle East. That shouldn't be a surprise, given Biden's campaign message that got him elected, and the executive orders and other actions he has quickly taken since the inauguration to undo Trump's legacy, both in domestic and foreign policy. Last week, Biden's administration imposed a temporary freeze on U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia and started reviewing the United Arab Emirates' recent purchases of F-35 fighter jets and armed drones, which were sealed on the last day of the Trump administration. Some Democrats hope that Biden will cancel the deals altogether. One of Biden's biggest aims is to ensure that American weapons no longer supply Saudi Arabia's air war against the Houthis in Yemen, where Riyadh has used U.S. bombs and other munitions in airstrikes that have indiscriminately killed civilians and implicated Washington in war crimes. In his recent confirmation hearing, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Biden has made clear that we will end our support for the military campaign led by Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and I think we will work on that in very short order. Biden is also restoring diplomatic relations with the Palestinian Authority, which Trump had all but ended. The Trump administration shuttered the Palestine Liberation Organization's diplomatic mission in Washington, as well as the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem, which it downgraded by folding into the new U.S. embassy to Israel that Trump moved to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. Biden's reconciliation with Palestinians includes resuming hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. aid to the UN. Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, known as UNRWA, which Trump had axed in one of his many punitive measures against the Palestinians. In perhaps the biggest shift, Biden is preparing to restart diplomacy with Iran and hopefully salvage the international deal curbing its nuclear program, Trump's biggest target in the Middle East. Last Friday, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, suggested the administration had a quicker than expected timeline to revive and rejoin the nuclear deal. We are going to have to address Iran's other bad behavior, malign behavior, across the region, but from our perspective, a critical early priority has to be to deal with what is an escalating nuclear crisis as they move closer and closer to having enough fissile material for a weapon, Sullivan said at an event in Washington hosted by the U.S. Institute of Peace that also included Trump's former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien. And we would like to make sure that we re-establish some of the parameters and constraints around the program that have fallen away over the course of the past 2 years. Although Sullivan didn't directly mention rejoining the nuclear deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, it was pretty clear what he was referring to when he said Biden wanted to get back to diplomacy that can put Iran's nuclear program in a box. The White House backtracked a bit over the weekend, in part because Sullivan's comments suggested a more urgent effort to rejoin the nuclear deal than Biden has indicated, and because Sullivan, who played a key role in talks with Iran over the JCPOA during the Obama administration, didn't mention any preconditions. No one should overread these comments, a senior White House official told the Washington Post. Mr. Sullivan made a general statement that the U.S. wants to put Iran's nuclear program back in the box, which we do. Notably, he did not even mention rejoining the JCPOA, let alone in what sequence. Blinken, for his part, has reiterated Biden's frequent call that Iran must fully comply with the nuclear deal again before the U.S. can rejoin it. Iran is out of compliance on a number of fronts. And it would take some time, should it make the decision to do so, for it to come back into compliance, and time for us then to assess whether it was meeting its obligations, Blinken said in a news conference last week, in his first public statements about Iran as Secretary of State. We're not there yet, to say the least. The appointment of veteran diplomat Robert Malley, who helped negotiate the JCPOA under President Barack Obama, as Biden's special envoy to Iran is another sign that diplomacy is a priority again, another swift departure from the Trump era. What course renewed talks with Iran ultimately take, and on what kind of timeline, are still up in the air and depend not just on the diplomatic nuts and bolts of the nuclear deal, but the political will and climate in Washington and Tehran, to say nothing of the other parties to the pact, including America's allies in Europe. But in quickly undoing many of the tenets of Trump's foreign policy, Even if some changes are more symbolic than others, Biden is bringing things back to the Obama era. In an interview with WPR's editor-in-chief, Judah Grunstein, in October, Malley, who until recently was the president and CEO of the International Crisis Group, reflected on what brought the Iran deal together in the first place under Obama. I think part of his thinking was, if we could cauterize the Iranian nuclear crisis, make sure that we have at least parked the nuclear issue so that, yeah, the other issues are going to remain. Iran is still going to be a country with which we have very deep differences, but at least we won't be continually on the verge of perhaps intervening militarily to stop a growing, burgeoning nuclear program, Malley said. It is a sentiment, and a strategy, that Sullivan was certainly echoing last week.